Hello, it is another Tuesday, which of course means it's time for another in real life video. As per usual, we are sort of taking it back a bit. We're just taking a simple question from someone this week. Feel free to, as well, as per usual, submit your own question in the comments below. I have an ever-growing and ever-shrinking list of questions and requests for ranking videos. Feel free to include those too. Helps a ton if when you're writing out the comment, you include a question mark and sort of write it like a question and all that. YouTube has this thing where you can sort of sort comments by if they contain a question. Lately, it seems to actually be working pretty correctly. When it first started to exist, I noticed that it was kind of touch and go. It was a little bit like sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I don't know. Sometimes it thought like a statement that someone made was a question. Other times, there would be people who wrote a question, and because they didn't have a question mark, it didn't know it at all. But lately it seems to be pretty good about, but just in case, you know, phrase it like a question, include a question mark, stuff like that. Gonna try to use that rather than the old Control F, because we're reaching a point where there's getting to be a lot of IRL videos, and a lot of the old ones are also accruing questions as well. So instead of just checking like the most recent few IRL videos, I kind of need to sort by most recent, right? That way none hopefully fall between the cracks. I'm sure some will eventually fall between the cracks, but hey, what can you do? Comes with the territory. Anyway. Also, this week on Halloween, there will be no regular videos, but ideally there will be another IRL video to sort of take its place. You know, it's a holiday, going to take that day off effectively, except for the IRL video, which will go up on that day. There'll be a fun ranking one, ideally, right? Tentatively, unless things go incredibly awry and it doesn't get done in time, right? But nonetheless, for this week, we are taking a general viewer submit question, and that question was submitted by a general viewer whose username, of course, should be somewhere in the lower third of your screen right about now. And they ask, well, let me bring it up first. Do you have any suggestions for changes to a CRPG's reward system so that players would be less likely to wreck the game's in-world economy early in a given playthrough? A fantastic question, one which is on the minds of many people who have taken a swing at making a video game, let alone, you know, a CRPG. I think that this question, you know, I think it extends far out beyond CRPGs, right? I think any sort of game where there is some type of in-game, like, economy of any sort, I think you run into issues of it just spiraling way out of control and the player just having a ludicrous amount of resources toward the end, or even like 1/3 of the way in or halfway in. You know, this is a tale as old as time, wherein, you know, if there's in-game money, you know, there's gold or whatever. There's oftentimes a certain point where gold just doesn't matter anymore, right? You just have so much, the idea of collecting more of it is just like, oh, maybe I'll see if I can reach like 1 million gold, you know? Maybe I'll see if I can reach, you know, whatever determinate number you decide upon. Same goes with like crafting reagents, other sorts of economy, you know? At a certain point, you're just like, you know, like, early on, maybe it's like, oh, I don't know if I should upgrade this item and make it a +1 or whatever, right? Give it a little bit more extra damage. But then, you know, at a certain point, it's like, well, of course I'm going to throw it on there. Of course I'm going to use my Titanite shards here, right? But I think there's 3 ways in which people or studios, developers, designers have figured out ways to solve this, right? I can't really think of any other ways beyond those 3. But after we sort of illuminate those 3, we'll talk about more about sort of the problems with it and how, like, you still kind of arrive at the same problem at the end of the day. I don't know how escapable this is without it being just like actually a game with a proper dungeon master or whatever, right? Anyway, one of the simpler ways, we sort of alluded to it right there, in which you can sort of address this problem, is addressing the rate, having like heavy control over the rate at which players get the resources that they need for the economy. That could be like, rather than having things cost like hundreds or whatever, thousands of gold, it costs like 2 gold. It costs like 1 gold, and it becomes a big deal when you get 1 gold. Same could go for crafting items, right? I think maybe the most famous example of this is like in From Software's games and all of that. But like I said, they're not the only ones who do it. There's plenty of like, in the instance of the question asker, there's plenty of CRPGs that do this and the other things that we're going to bring up. But for instance, in Dark Souls, they're pretty precious with their crafting upgrade materials, you know? It's not even until like certain thresholds where you get to points where you could theoretically farm out certain things, right? And even then, there's other upgrades that you can only get in one playthrough, and to get more of them, you would literally have to do like a new game plus. So it's kind of a big commitment to decide like, okay, do I want to like ascend this item, this weapon, this armor to like its maximum potential, but I can only do this with one item, so I need to know ahead of time like what the outcome will be. I need to have it locked down, like what sort of character I'm going to be and all of that. It creates kind of a very confined system, which asks a lot of the player. And in some games, like, you know, a From Software game, you sort of go in with the expectation that this is going to be a bit of a tougher game, right? A lot of things are going to be a lot more locked down. Combat is going to be a little bit tougher. That extends outward to sort of like crafting systems, economy systems, and all of that. You know, speaking of economy, you spend souls or whatever, right? Whatever sort of MacGuffin they decide to use in that game. You spend souls on not just leveling up, but also items from vendors. It's oftentimes the same exact thing, and if you die twice in a row, you lose all your stuff if you didn't go back and collect it. You know, it's very tough. It's very harsh on you. Which sort of dovetails nicely into the other way in which you can solve it. The secondary way, which is having something that continually sucks up those resources. That being, for instance, I died twice in a row. I didn't pick up my stuff off of my dead body. Thus, all of that is gone, right? You've immediately like wiped out a big chunk of the player's like accumulated economy, so to speak, you know? All of your currently amassed stuff out the window. You see this a bunch in like roguelikes or whatever, right? You can get a lot more loosey-goosey with those because it's expected that in a roguelike, you will die. There will be like periods of feasting and famine, right? Sometimes you'll have a run where, oh my gosh, my economy's booming, right? There will be other times where it's like, oh, I'm barely hanging on. And oftentimes that will be your end, you know? And sometimes maybe your economy is booming, but other things are not going so well in the run that you're doing in a roguelike. Stuff like that. You could also extend this out to other systems. Like I think you could have a sort of system that continually takes money from you, you know, not unlike, I believe, what's it called? Pathfinder Kingmaker was a pretty big example of this. There was an early example, right? And it didn't do this continuously, but a very early example that I remember would be Baldur's Gate 2, wherein you sort of have this estate, this keep or whatever, and sometimes they demand resources of you. Sometimes it takes up gold. Sometimes it gives you gold. But often if you want to do, like, if you want to be good, right, which I think the vast majority of players do for their first playthrough at least, they want to be nice to people. It ends up being a bit of a gold sink until maybe the very end when there's finally some payoff. But yeah, stuff like that, gold sinks that are regularly occurring. Because true enough, you could have gold sinks like, oh, I'm going to buy a player house or whatever. That's only one time, right? That doesn't address the fact that, like, you're still playing the game. You're still accumulating more and more money. You're still accumulating more and more, like, crafting items. You gain more iron ore, more, like, rubies or whatever you need to craft. You just keep getting more and more because you're still enjoying the game. You're still playing the game, right? it still can spin out of control. Similarly, just as we had mentioned with the Dark Souls scenario with regards to like it being very strict and very precise about when it starts to hand things out to the player, it could be very oppressive having like what is effectively like an in-game taxation system. It almost feels like you're being punished for playing the game, right? You get worried like, ooh, do I want to keep playing? I'm kind of like in a bad spot. I almost feel like, should I just start over? I feel like I screwed myself here, right? Like, oh, I bought too many in-game houses and I don't yet have like enough money to get this. Oh, this sucks. It feels horrible, when it should be a system that is, you know, for the most part meant to reward the player with like, oh, I got an in-game house or whatever, right? But then it's like, oh, I have to pay taxes on it or whatever. The other way in which the sort of tertiary way in which I think you could resolve this, it's also on sort of a suck up stuff sort of route, and that's like spreading it out, right? Having more and more different, right? Making it not just be, I think the terminology that's used is like vertical progression versus horizontal progression, right? Wherein vertical progression, when it comes to in-game economy, would be just like, oh, I keep getting gold, right? I keep getting gold. My gold keeps going up. My ability to get gold keeps going up. I'm just getting more and more gold. Everything costs gold. Whoopee, I have so much gold. I can get whatever I want. Now gold is meaningless, right? You could also do a situation where, and most games already do this, wherein they have crafting reagents, right? That's the main thing to do. But you could also do it with like various currencies. A lot of MMOs do this, right? They have like, oh, you get badges of honor or whatever for running a heroic dungeon, right? Oh, you get these little tokens for running a raid or whatever, right? And then you can spend that on various items for your character and all that. They just spread out the different currencies to where it's not solely in just one pile, right? All the eggs are in different baskets. You're having to build up different baskets. That in and of itself, right? You can already see how this could become a problem where it's annoying, right? You just want to get an item and you don't have to you don't want to worry about other stuff, right? You don't want to have to worry about multiple currencies. How often is it that this is like the bane of a sort of like mobile game, or like so many free-to-play games wherein there's like a gajillion different currencies and it's like, yeah, you gotta balance them all. And then immediately, as soon as you're in there, you're like, yeah, well, this is obviously the crappy currency that I'm getting the most of. There's the premium one, which I have to pay real-life money for, or is super-duper rare to find. You get stuff like that. And there's like Goldilocks zones for that. But just as with all the others, there's chances where like you run into problems, right? None of these are without their own pitfalls and problems. And in a similar way, you're just, with this third situation where you're like spreading out currencies, and I don't just mean like, to be clear, I don't mean just like in New Vegas, oh, this gun costs bottle caps, but also depending on who I'm trading to, it could also cost NCR dollars, you know, that's effectively the same. It's the same system. I mean, like, you spread things out through a system, right? Wherein you need to do different things, or it's a completely different reward for doing a certain minor objective within the same like gameplay loop or whatever, you know? Oh, I need not just money to craft this weapon, right? Well, but I also need like a spider's web, you know? Thus, I need to make sure I kill spiders and stuff like that, you know? I need a Titanite shard, right? You could just have it to where upgrading an item or purchasing an item requires more and more currencies, but the more you keep doing, the more convoluted it all feels, and the more it just seems like such a big to-do for the player, right? It becomes annoying. It's very annoying. Like I had said, I don't think there's a perfect solution to this, aside from just very carefully micromanaging stuff. But even then, if you decide to keep micromanaging stuff, you run into a situation where the game almost feels unapproachable to a more casual audience, right? Not everybody is going out there wanting to make something that's super hardcore, to where it's like, okay, we're deciding like right here at this point, we're going to make sure the player gets an upgrade material, right? And if they just so happen to find 4 other cases of it across the various levels, then they'll be able to upgrade their sword to a +1, right? Not everybody is into that. Some people are into that, but a lot of people will see that and be frustrated and just be like, oh man, I do like, or even there's even like multitudes within people, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, I do want to play something challenging like that. And other times you have the feeling of like, well, I just had a tough day. I just kind of want to chill. I don't even want to think about this really. Maybe I don't want to play this, right? There's no simple solution to it, but there are solutions. Like I said, the toughest thing is the fact that these are games that just keep going on and on. So without like being very particular with when you reward the player with these items, it's just always naturally going to spin out of control. I mean, shoot, even if you look at, for instance, like I said, a Dark Souls or whatever, anything from Software, where they are very particular about where players get upgrade materials. Even those games are open-ended in the sense that you can do New Game Plus, right? You can keep finding more and more of these items. You can keep finding more upgrade materials in other playthroughs. And quite simply, until you start getting into really, really high New Game Plus, which by then, vast majority of players who even are interested in doing a New Game Plus run will have checked out by then. But you can still get to a point where like, oh, I have all of my weapons upgraded to maximum. You know, I've really 100%ed my armory, as it were. My character's like various sets of armor. Everything is maxed out because I played through the game just that many times. I don't think there's any other way around it. And at a certain point, I feel like you just have to throw your hands up in the air and just say, okay, well, if you want to play the game that way, go for it. You know, if you want to like try and max everything out, maybe you should be able to, which I think is another question worth bearing in mind and worth asking. I think it's an inevitable problem. You know, I think it's just going to keep happening without any sort of, like, the best solution would be like, I would think something that continually taxes the player. But even then, right, you could spiral out of control and have like a player fall to the wayside or whatever. You know, just like in real life where people have various things of maintenance, right? Like, oh, I need to buy groceries. Uh-oh, suddenly groceries are costing a lot and I'm not making a lot, right? You have issues like that. And then, you know, people fall to the wayside. It's not unlike real life in that sense, I suppose. It's a difficult balancing act, and I don't know how you really solve it. The best thing you can do is lessen it as much as you can and have it be like opted in, right? Have it be to where like you opt in and you sort of internally, even if you don't like consciously think this, you're like, okay, I know I'm playing this game for a lot. It makes sense that I have over 1 million gold in this game, right? It's fine. Right, I've been playing the game for a lot. The joy of playing the game is enough. I don't need to worry about the economy or whatever, right? And shoot, even in games that do focus on like economies, right? Sort of a Sim City-esque, like a City Skylines or whatever. Even they suffer from this problem where if you just keep playing because it's open-ended, you're eventually just going to accumulate so many resources. There's nothing else to like spend it on to like, you know, there's no charity that you could just give it to and just better everyone else's lives, right? You're just going to continually keep on hoarding stuff. You're going to be that Stardew Valley farmer with a gajillion gold and you don't really have anything else to spend it on, right? It doesn't matter how many times that game gets updated, you're eventually going to hit a point where you just have so much stuff. You know, you have it all. And at that point, a lot of people are just like, okay, I had fun. That's enough for me, right? Time to go play Fields of Mystria or whatever, right? I don't know how you get around it. I think the only thing you can do is lessen it and decide, what approaches you want to take, because you could take multiple approaches like we had said, and what emphasis you want to put on each approach to lessen it, right? And that sort of formulates, that's your video game's DNA, as it were, right? Deciding like, okay, we're being very strict about deciding where to reward players, right? But we do want multiple different currencies, right? We do want there to be gold. We do want there to be little gems, right? that you find in the world to encourage exploration, and you need those as well to craft endgame equipment or craft upgrades to get your equipment up that high and stuff like that, sort of rewarding, putting a carrot on a stick for other tasks in the game, giving them, that way the joy is also from going through the motions, but also you get a little reward at the end, and it makes everything else a little bit easier. It's asking for like perpetual management, right? This is why I said at the start, the simplest way is to have someone who is very like mindful of these systems from the get-go, and they sort of are playing dungeon master for you. They're deciding, okay, I know that you have a bunch of money right now, so I'm going to give you something else as a reward for going through and defeating this encounter. But even then, as a player, maybe you've built up an expectation that, oh, I'm going to get money. Thus, I know I'm going to have a little bit of a jump on whatever cool item is next, Instead, I'm getting a ingot of adamantium, which I'm going to have to use to upgrade my weapon. It's such a difficult balancing act. I don't think there's any way to just solve it without just an obscene level of micromanagement. And even then, I think managing it to such a degree, you sort of cut back on player freedom. Other players would be like, oh, well, I don't like that it's so up my ass about spending and accumulating the resources. I just want to chill, right? I'm here to have fun, right? You sort of have to introspectively look at like, okay, what type of players are we wanting for our game? What are their expectations? How harsh do we want to be on them? A lot of it is just about like measuring and managing expectations and sort of trying to meet them and trying to pan things out in certain ways. And sometimes even subverting expectations, right? You want to do something against the grain, because that in and of itself could be a draw that look at us. This is a game where this is a roguelike, sometimes you're going to have a run where you're just making loads and loads of money and you're just going to annihilate everything because your economy is through the roof, right? You're playing Vampire Survivors and looks like you just got really good rolls on everything. You got the perfect build. You're raking in the little blue gems. You're up to the red ones and stuff, right? It's coming in real fast and good, It's tough. Like I said, I don't think there's a perfect solution to it. There are too many variables. There is too much of an issue of it being perpetually playable. I guess maybe the nicest way you can do it is almost what survival horror games do. If you want to get really into survival horror, you have it to where it's like, okay, we're going to have health pickups here. This is going to be an upgrade for your max health. This is going to be an upgrade for your weapon. This is going to be ammunition for your weapon, or something to increase its durability in this space, right? You could choose to fight this scary monster and you would get more ammo for it. So the player needs to make a judgment call of like, okay, how much ammo do I think I'm going to spend killing this monster? Is this going to be worth it, right? There's a lot of different judgment calls about that. And the important thing in that is that it has a finite end. Even if you do a new game plus, I think, especially in survival horror, I think a lot of this is thanks to like Resident Evil, in particular, probably Resident Evil 4 originally, where new game plus, there's an expectation like, who gives a shit, right? If the player wants, they can have an infinite rocket launcher if they did good enough, You can have a pistol that has infinite ammo. It always one-shots. You can have a flamethrower, New Game Plus is just a realm of like, now we're just fucking around with the game. It's becoming a sandbox, you know? The intended experience is the standard New Game Plus 0 run, and you sort of go from there. I think that's the only way you can go about is if there's a finite end to the game and it's not terribly open world, you know, because if you make a game super open world, you can't sort of make it with the expectation that, like, okay, we expect every player of our game is going to do 90% of the game, because that's just not going to happen, right? There's going to be different variations of that, like where some people do 100% of everything. Some people do just the main quest. Some people don't even get that far and they still could enjoy the game even if they don't finish it, right? You could have someone who goes in, plays Skyrim, for example, and they don't finish anything, let alone the main quest. They don't finish a single arc. They just kind of chill, and they still look back fondly on their time with Skyrim, and they're like, yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed it. You didn't finish anything to the end or whatever, but it doesn't matter, right? That's sort of the challenge of it when you have these vast amounts of game that exist for the players to go through, whether that be just to the end of the game, right? Or beyond it, New Game Plus, or it's just a huge open-ended experience, stuff like that. It's tough. There's no easy way around it. Like I said, it's all about sort of understanding expectations, managing what you have within your players' expectations and stuff like that. I think that's the only way you can do it. Anyway, that I think ought to do it for this week. When next we return, like I said, ideally, hopefully, on Halloween itself, there will be not standard videos, but there will be an IRL video. It'll be a fun ranking one. Anyway, until next time, please take care of each other.